Hello, ladies and gentlemen, business owners, my fellow citizens. This is Daryl Guberman, CEO of Guberman PMC LLC, a quality consulting firm here in Connecticut. We've been open for 13 years as of August, and we've been involved with quality for over 40 plus years in aerospace, medical implants, materials printing, and plastic distribution, where we dealt with all industries. Today, this video will illustrate to you how Boeing and their accreditation body goes like this. Sherman-Clayton Act broken by Boeing and their accreditation / underwriters, ANSI-ANAB. I'm going to show this to you, business owners. In 2013, I gave a speech at the American Society for Quality. There was a Region 3 director there, Dave Levy. While I'm talking, you can read this down below or stop the video. So, the Region 3 director from the ASQ, he came in with a lot of weight. He's a Region 3 director. And at the time, the American Society for Quality, who sits on the American National Standards Institute board, owned ANAB 50%. ASQ owned ANAB 50%, while ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, owned ANAB 50%. So it's a 50-50 mix. So I got 50% approval rating for this, which I did not want, because I felt that being independent is a viable form of accreditation / certification for companies to have an alternative rather than to have an ANSI-ANAB accreditation, because most in this country are ANSI-ANAB accreditation, and I thought they would have a different appeal. You know, we give them service 24/7, Monday through Sunday. We are there. Okay, when you call these other registrars accredited by ANSI-ANAB, they say, you can't consult yet. When you're in an audit, the auditor will say, well, you ought to do it this way. It's a bunch of bullshit. In 2016, we had Randy Doty. As you can read this, it said, if you want to join ANAB or IAF or both, it is all voluntary. Do you hear what he says? At the time, he was a technical advisor. You're going to find him in a picture in here. He was at one time the ANAB vice president, also the chairman of the International Accreditation Forum Incorporated in Delaware, and he was also on the principal of the IAF tax report 990. At the time he wrote us, he was the principal, so he had some weight behind him too. He was the technical advisor for ANAB. As you can see, voluntary. But we found an article, okay? We found an article from the International Automotive Task Force. And as you can see, it's not mandatory, it's mandated. Isn't that a mess? Now we go on to the brass tacks, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize for this, but I am going to show you how Boeing broke the Sherman-Clayton Act when we tried to get our customers in there. Our customers submitted our cert, and on, I guess, the purchasing sheet, it says must be ANSI-ANAB accredited. Why? Because you will find out that Boeing sits on ANSI-ANAB's board. One side is the board of directors, which guides the company. The next is the board that can grant, suspend, and withdraw certification. In my 40 plus years in quality, the only time I saw a cert removed from somebody in the AS9100 arena is for lack of payment. And unbelievable. But they sat on the board, or they sit on the board of ANSI-ANAB. They also mandated on their supplier portal must be ANSI-ANAB or internationally equivalent. By the way, Lockheed Martin does the same shit. Same thing. Same thing. They all sit on ANSI's board, by the way. Boeing, Lockheed, etc., FAA, FBI, FTC, DOJ, DOD, etc. They all sit on ANSI's board. So you already have that they sit on the boards. It's on their supplier portal. And the thing that makes it's all a monopoly here. It's all constriction of quality, which you can see from all these failures they don't have, because they run the board, basically. They run their quality accreditation they demanded. So in 2002, they came out with a supplier bulletin that said this, ladies and gentlemen, you cannot make this up. They said, send in your AS9100 for aerospace certificate accredited by ANAB. Send it in, send in your parts, and Boeing doesn't have to send any inspectors to ensure that you're not making it in an alligator swamp or not making it in the Amazon rainforest. Just send us a cert, and we don't know where those parts are coming from. And here we go, ladies and gentlemen, to show you the breaking of the Sherman-Clayton Act. It's disgusting. ANSI is a private, not-for-profit, non-governmental entity that has both federal agencies and corporations on board, and they've been around for over 100 plus years. In 2015, Randy Doty, the vice president of ANAB, the chairman of the IAF and principal on the IAF tax form, handed over leadership to this communist Chinese national who's been involved with our quality since 1994, Zhao Jinwu. At the time, Zhao Jinwu was the chief executive of the China National Accreditation Services in Beijing, China. In 2017, when Randy Doty was sitting there being advertised in the Department of Homeland Security, who also sits on ANSI's board, where you have a Phil Matheson getting paid $256,000 tax-free money from ANSI as a board member. Okay, he was sitting on the Department of Homeland Security while this guy was in Wuhan, China, issuing ISO certificate for laboratory accreditation. Okay. In 2018, Ms. Pamela Sale, the vice president for ANSI-ANAB, accreditation for laboratory, stated under deposition that we have laboratory accreditation is lacking protocols and it's an ad hoc type of we pick this, we don't pick that. There is no structure to it. 2018, a contingency went over to China. Okay, went over to China, Wuhan, China. The scientists there were complaining about not having adequately trained technicians. In May of 2019, the CDC came out with a training document for BioLevel 4 laboratories, in China no less. And the only lab mentioned in this whole training document was, you guessed it, Wuhan, China. What happened is, on page 3 of that document, it states the most integral part of running any lab is to have well-trained technicians, because that is your first line of defense in the likelihood there's an escape. That is a containment, a must. You have to have trained technicians. So he basically gave the certificate to a laboratory that was out of control, just for money. And yes, it is confessed by no other than the vice president of ANSI-ANAB that they did release the virus because they lacked protocol, and he issued a certificate. And by the way, the China National Accreditation Services is equivalent in accreditation to ANSI-ANAB. ANSI-ANAB are underwriters for the International Accreditation Forum incorporated in Delaware, and also ILAC, the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation. We continue. You also have ANAB sitting on ANSI's board. In 2018, ANSI took over complete control over ANAB. And at the time that Zhao Jinwu was commanding it, the IAF, guess what? They were sitting on ANSI-ANAB's, ANSI-ANAB was sitting on the IAF. As I've showed you, Randy invited us to go get on board. It's all voluntary, either ANAB, IAF, or both. How in good conscience could I join ANAB? Number one is they were sitting, being watched over and controlled by a communist Chinese national, Zhao Jinwu, who's been involved with our quality since 1994. Number two is, how could I get involved with IAF when IAF was controlled by freaking China? On top of that, all those federal agencies and corporations like FBI, CDC, NIH, FAA, FDA, and you have Lockheed and Boeing and all the rest of that mess, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, all sitting on ANSI, getting their data taken because Zhao Jinwu has the China National Intelligence Law, Article number 7, which mandates espionage. Another good one is they stress that they're an American company, ANSI-ANAB. Well, let me tell you something. They've got 10 different registrars in China that can issue an ANAB or ANSI-ANAB accreditation. To test, you want to know about their being an underwriter. Underwriter means they take all legal responsibilities. But because the DOJ is on board, because the FBI, I have a contract between ANSI-ANAB and the FBI about their laboratory, which, by the way, in Washington in about, I think, 2017, 18, possibly 2016, they got the ANAB certificate taken away because of glaring issues in laboratory protocols. Pamela Sale said there's none. So on this federal contract from 2018, it's going to state, and you're going to see it, that ANSI-ANAB are underwriters for the IF. So this is a confession to the fact that that door that blew off any quality issue within a system, doesn't matter aerospace, medical, automotive, electronics, because ANSI-ANAB are underwriters, and this is stated on a federal contract as well, then they are legally responsible and binding. And by the way, 2018, China was still watching, Communist China was still watching over the IF, and look what they say on this. They say, ANAB or ANSI-ANAB is an underwriter for the International Accreditation Forum, so our own State Department invited freaking China in through the Standard Operating Work Order. Isn't that a tender moment? Now we get to the good stuff. Boeing. Here it is, Boeing, Boeing, Boeing. This is the actual document from 2002 that states about the supplier bulletin, where it states an on-site Boeing survey or audit of the supplier's quality system if need be. Our preference is to deal with proven suppliers with excellent quality performance and not have to do on-site system audits. Now, if the company doesn't have an AS9100 at that time, but they're requiring it, if you read that bulletin, they really require it. They said they will accept from an aerospace company like a Lockheed Martin, if they come in and do an audit and you pass it successfully, you hand it into Boeing and they say, oh, that looks good. Send us your parts. We don't have to do an audit now. I've already showed you this about Boeing being FAA regulator in 2009. Boeing sits on ANSI's board, and they sit just to prove to you, my friends, and Tim Lee right over here. There it is. And this is from 2020, so it's a mere 4 years ago. You know, they jumble this up all the time so that they could hide. But during this time, Boeing was sitting there for a long time on the board. The ANAB Management System Accreditation Council grants, suspends, and withdraws accreditation of certification bodies, which means registrars. Can you imagine that? On top of that, Boeing sits by 7 different registrars. There's a lot more, but they sit by 7 different registrars, okay, that utilize the ANAB logo and that are accredited by ANAB. So is there any confidence in the integrity and quality of the quality certifications that they are issuing to the AS9100 companies? No. In fact, I've been doing this for 13 years, and you go out there and they say, Daryl, we'd love to, transfer over to you. You give better service. A friend of ours has your certification. You give better service. They're not AS9100 because of Boeing, and Boeing mandates it. Most recently, a company down in Texas that I've known since 1998, we're not going to give the name, but this goes to Steve and Stan. We were on the phone probably about 2-3 years ago with Boeing, 2 ladies that didn't know the engine cowling from the back tail, said that we only accept ANSI-ANAB accreditation. Why? Because they got 7 registrars that sit there. Confidence in quality? No, we can see it eroding already. On their supplier bulletin, portal, it states must be ANSI-ANAB or internationally equivalent. Now, you have the bulletin that mandates ANSI-ANAB accreditation. You have the supplier portal that does the mandates ANSI-ANAB. You have them sitting on the board of ANSI-ANAB that can grant, suspend, and withdraw certification. On top of that, while they're an FAA regulator, they got caught fudging documentation. I guess the FAA came in there and looked at the FAA. Well, this is kind of a sticky situation since this is around 2017. They were caught fudging documentation. You've got the Federal Aviation Administration who granted them regulatory authority. I guess Boeing learned how to fudge documentation from them. But I have a question for you. How can one regulator, the FAA, watch over another regulator, Boeing? Can I ask you that question? You tell me. I know the NTSB is trying to get some data for them for the Alaskan airline, and they're refusing it because no government agency talks to another government agency. This is a heads up. This was put out in 2008 about the issue is truly a heads up. Accredited AS9100, etc. Expect a very prompt response from ANAB. What they did is Boeing went in to do a cursory inspection, believe it or not, on a couple of their companies that supply materials, and they found out discrepancies on the ANSI-ANAB audits that were done, and they were dragging their feet. If somebody wants a copy of this, this is Heads Up issue 116, and this was dated 3/7/2008. Sitting on ANSI's board is the Department of Defense, U.S. Department of Transportation, the FBI. And by the way, here is the actual contract between ANSI-ANAB and the FBI. Okay? Unbelievable how incestuous this is. And that lab that they certified, they had to take the certificate away, or at least suspend it until they got their shit together. We have Mr. Christopher Wray, the FBI guy, the director, who states all the time, we must maintain vigilance over China, yet he was watched over by China between 2015 and 21. So he should be fired. We gotta get a new, I hope if Donald Trump or whoever gets in, they gotta do a clean house there, because this guy does not know his ass from page 10. And you know why? Because this is the way he normally comes to work. If you read the bottom over there, it tells you that this came right out of an excerpt from one of his depositions, that we must maintain vigilance over China. And he was watched over by China. And the last one we're going to show you, and this is very important for those individuals for Alaska Air. You know who sits by Boeing? The Department of Justice. And I will tell you this. ANSI-ANAB are involved with the American Bar Association, so I would be very wise. I have talked to many attorneys who are dealing in the sphere of the Alaska Airlines. If you don't get goob, you're gonna get screwed. Remember that statement. If you don't get goob, you're gonna get screwed. And I don't care what type of attorneys Boeing has. What we have is over 40 years of research, 40 years of integrity, honesty, and the truth. If you don't have goob, you're gonna get screwed.